People who knew murderers, when did you know something was off? My bio dad ended up murdering my stepmom. Everyone in my family, my mom and 2 older brothers, definitely knew that something was up. He had severe anger issues and was very abusive. Some of the earlier memories I have are of him choking one of my brothers. He even almost choked my mom to death a couple of times. Obviously my mom was smart and divorced him as he didn't want to see him kill my brothers. Years later I come home from school and my mom and stepdad take us all to the side and tell us he shot our stepmom and was currently in jail. None of us were surprised. If anything, I was just so grateful my mom left him. It's so strange that I am directly related to a murderer. Never. He was a seemingly happy kid who brought a backpack full of, probably stolen, SNES games over to my place pretty regularly. The last time I posted this, I said he killed another teen in a drug-related turf war. I looked up his case afterwards and it was actually 2. Same here. Worked with a kid for a year or so. And he was so sweet and nice. I went off to college. And that summer I visited home and ran into him. He was his usual nice, sweet self. He killed 2 classmates and shot a third about 20 minutes later. I never had any weird feelings from him and was completely shocked to learn this news the next day. The murderer I know was more of an acquaintance or casual friend. He lived down the hall from me and we hung out sometimes, but not like just the 2 of us. Still, we chill at each other's place regularly. I passed him one day in the stairwell and I said hi. He said hi back but called me by the wrong name. He was really distracted and kind of awkward. He didn't make eye contact and kept moving. I remember thinking maybe we don't know each other as well as I thought. Later he was playing Nintendo. Yep. My N64. This was a while ago, with my roommate when I came home. He apologized and said his mind was elsewhere. A couple days later there are cops all over the building, interviewing people and searching his place. They'd found the guy's roommate with a bullet in the back of his head in an abandoned lot across town. The next day he confessed. A great uncle shot one of my great uncles for trying to fondle or rape another family member. Turns out everybody was tired of his shit. So the killing was never reported. Nobody quite knows where the body is buried. But my guess is that he threw it into the river. We were a dictatorship at the time, so seeing bodies flushed down the river was not uncommon. Had an employee on my work crew. Acted strange and wouldn't listen to direction. Had goofy huge sideburns. Ended up going to jail for a short time. When he got out he shot his GF and her parents. Honestly, this girl I went to school with killed 2 kids she babysat and their mother. Before that, I would have told you she was one of the calmest, coolest people in our school. Would have never suspected her to do something like that. The first time I met him, Jose was a friend of my ex and something immediately seemed off. He was sneaky, always lying and cheating, but not good at it cause he was dumb. And a total narcissist as well. I told my ex to keep his distance. That Jose would only get him into some shit. Not only did he set my ex up to be robbed, Jose snitched on a bunch of other people. And finally snapped on stranger in a fit of roidroid rage and stabbed him. The guy he killed was fairly young and a good kid. Just in the wrong place at the time. I hope that asshole rots in prison. Edited to clear up any confusion. I worked with someone that killed someone in self-defense. I didn't believe his story, which is probably why he served time for the incident. The story he told was that he was having sex with some girl and her husband came home and found them and immediately attacked him. He said he didn't want to fight him but killed him in self-defense. Some months after we hired him we got word that he also had some child molestation in his criminal record. Once that word spread around he disappeared. He had stolen some stuff from co-workers before he left. 2 weeks later he was robbed and killed outside a bar near work. Kid I went to school with from 5th to 8th grade. He was always a dick. Typical class clown but with a mean streak. When we hit middle school he was always making comments about 2 girls that were incredibly inappropriate. I never liked him and hated being around him. He ended up getting into meth and shot his mom and dad in their sleep while high. His mom died and his dad survived but was severely injured. Last I heard he was crying crocodile tears saying he regrets everything and wants another chance. But knowing him, it's total bullshit. He deserves to rot. Edit. Should probably add he shot his parents when he was in his later years of high school. I only went to school with him from 5th to 8th because I changed schools. I didn't. He was the sweetest, kindest, gentle giant kind of guy. Kind of a weirdo, but still a great guy overall. I remember once that he shed a tear just by talking about his kid. Because he was so filled with emotion from having him in his life. He turned out to kill his wife, kidnap his child, start the longest Amber Alert in the history of Canada. As he tried escaping to a different province, he killed another man to steal his car. I'm still unsure today if I should have seen anything at any point. It comes to haunt my nightmares from time to time. I went through primary and high school with a guy in the year below me who seemed a little distant. We lived near each other and caught the bus from the same stop. He was a bit of a bully, but it was something more. Like you could tell he wasn't a bully because he was hurting inside or because he felt threatened in some way. He was a bully because he did what he wanted to do and didn't realize that it hurt other people. Like the kind of kid who enjoyed pulling wings off flies. Not long after I left my hometown, I heard that he had been charged with the murder of a 2-year-old. Apparently his girlfriend at the time left her daughter with him for an hour or so while she ran an errand. He couldn't deal with the toddler crying anymore, so he beat her. He caused severe internal bleeding and she died in hospital not long after. He would have been around 22 when he did it. He was sentenced to 36 years with a non-parole period of 27 years. Edit. This happened in Australia around 2014. I knew this kid my entire life. We were friends in elementary and middle school, more middle school. He was your typical redneck kid but a kind person. Imagine if Pinky from Pinky and the Brain grew up in the rural south. Well, as people do in school, we drifted apart. He honestly wasn't the person in the group I was friends with, he was just in that circle. So we went about our lives. A year after we graduated in the same town we all grew up in, he killed his entire family. Mother, brother, stepsister, father. Just for no reason. Nothing really provoked him from my understanding. He left and went to ride ATVs with his friend later that day. They caught him and he had no memory of it. He went to court and got life and never could recount a single moment, at least he said. It was weird seeing this kid who was to your knowledge just dumber than a bag of hammers yet odd innocence to him. On trail for such atrocities. He just sat stone-faced the entire time. Almost like he didn't understand what had happened. Not to say I felt bad for him, but I felt something. Sadness perhaps. Co-worker was just super narcissistic and was always talking about his childhood in Alaska. We worked in fast food and I was his boss, and one day he asked to go cut ice out of the freezer with a knife. A few years later I heard he killed someone. I still do not know what his motive was, but I definitely wouldn't put it past him. When they started telling me they've had sleep paralysis every night and they also said they just really enjoy hurting people. I once met a guy at a train station and we got into a conversation over our mutual irrational fear of wasps. He casually told me how much of a sadist he was and casually explained that that's why he chose to be a butcher. He just went on and on about much he loved slicing their throats and listen to their screams. If there's ever a story about a murderous butcher near Cologne, I'll know exactly who it is. Well, attempted murderer. He attacked his dad with a hammer. He was one of my best friends growing up. I couldn't see it, but my parents did. They always said something seemed off. I only began to see it in my early 20s. There was just something off behind his eyes. He was very impulsive and keen to take big risks. Last I heard he's in the state mental hospital indefinitely. I have a friend's friend who, you know the drill. And they didn't know. They had no idea. Normal day with co-workers. Where's Stephanie? She didn't show up for like 4 days straight. Doesn't matter. Work. Speak with co-workers. Suddenly police bursts in and arrest one of her co-worker. Another woman. Who killed Stephanie over work disagreement? Dismembered the body to hide it. And went back to work like nothing happened. She walked out handcuffed and was convicted. Unfortunately, I know a few people who have committed murder. The one I knew was crazy from an early age was a guy we call Biggie in the neighborhood. He was always crazy. He legit thought he served in the deep jungles of Vietnam. He was like 2 when it ended, maybe 5 years ago. He went to some rehabilitation jail for killing a bunch of dogs and they let him out on a day pass. He didn't return and he beat a well-known gay activist to death at a bar that night. He's been released since then and he lives back at his parents' house. I know for a fact he will do this again. Edit. I'm not a doctor or, as someone pointed out, from the future, so I don't know for a fact he will do it again. I hope he doesn't. There was this guy who stabbed a young brunette woman 37 times and then raped her post-mortem. It turned to a cold case for 9 years. They finally caught the guy a couple years ago. Crazy thing was, I, a young brunette woman, worked next door to the bar where this guy drank every night. I also was a raging alcoholic and got blacked out drunk and walked home from there on and off nights regularly. Almost every night. Almost 2 years sober now. Thank God. However, I knew something was off about this guy the minute I laid eyes on him. I read people like RMF. And I just knew he wasn't someone to know. I talked to everyone who frequented that bar but I never had a single conversation with him. And if I was out on a smoke break while he was outside, I just never felt like I could turn my back on him. When they arrested him due to one of his relatives adding their DNA to a genetic testing site, I straight up got chills down my spine for the first time in my life. Crazy thing was, I wasn't surprised. I was just surprised I knew from the minute I saw him. When he came looking for me because I was the only one that knew of the abandoned mine we both found when exploring as kids. It had been years since we had talked and he suddenly showed up looking for me. He killed his roommate because he was gay and made a pass at him. Dumped the body in the mine in Boulder County, Colorado. I knew a guy who killed his dad with a baseball bat, found not guilty. I met his dad when he came into the bar I worked at. He was a nightmare. He would squeeze people's hands when he shook them. He and his son were both boxers and the dad was really rough with him apparently. The day he was found not guilty, he sent a text to someone at the base saying, "I told you I would get off." I knew someone when I was in my early 20s in India. He was a dirtbag, but a fun guy under the right circumstances. I made sure to talk with him and be as pleasant as I could, while keeping him at an arm's distance. I moved away and then my mum tells me several years later that he and his 4 brothers were hired killers. Apparently 2 people got into a fight over a property and one of them hired these bunch of thugs. They waited for their victim to get home, get changed and relax, when they exploded an oil can in front of his house. When he came running out to see what was going on, they threw red chili powder in his face to blind him and chopped him to bits with large sickles. Apparently, the body was in multiple pieces at the funeral. I knew the victim as well. Guy had 2 daughters. F-king crazy. My neighbor and first sort of boyfriend ended up running over his girlfriend's mother after stealing her money for drugs. He was always a bit controlling and a lot out of control. But as soon as he started doing serious drugs around 17 was when he became a serious concern. He ran away from home and disappeared only for his mom to get a call that he has killed someone. I think it was ruled as manslaughter though, since there wasn't enough evidence that he intended to kill her. A friend of a friend at college used to hang around and smoke cigarettes with us. Never spoke much and that always made me feel uncomfortable. A few months back his grandfather tried to get him sectioned on a psychiatric ward. They rejected him, stating he wasn't bad enough. 2 weeks later he stabbed his grandmother to death and cut her face off in the middle of the street. Normal family. Dad, mum and 3 children. They lived in front of the house where we moved to when I was around 11. Everything was normal. We weren't the closest neighbors. Just an always greet them with a smile kind of relationship. When I was around 16 he killed his wife with a knife. In his house. In front of his children. They were kids. I think their brains made up a story about a monster when they were in court. They still love his dad. Visited him in jail. And moved back with him after he was released years after. I worked in a food court in my early 20s. This family would come in pretty regularly. The family stuck out because they were giants. Mum was easily 6 feet 1 inches and dad was 6 feet 7 inches. They had a few kids. Nothing really stuck out at the time. They never seemed happy but never fought. They just always looked like they were just coming out of mourning. I heard a few years back that the mom decided to leave the dad. The dad murdered the whole family and then killed himself. Another co-worker did something similar. He lived with his elderly dad. He was a super nice, but just always had this deep sadness behind his face. His GF broke up with him. His dad's health went south. Everything became too much, so he shot his dad and then himself. Even after hearing that, I felt bad for him. He seemed like a dude with a big heart, and if he just had a day to decompress and someone to talk to, I think it would have gone a lot differently. Not mine, but my wife's story. She attended Columbine HS at the time of the shooting. She said she never could have expected the shooters to do what they did. They were just weird. Not too dissimilar to any other weird kid. But they didn't talk about what they were planning in public. I'm purposely omitting their names. Cause FCKM. Guy I worked with killed the man who raped his sister. Made his own justice. He spent 18 years in prison. Came out quiet but confident. Stern. Keeping his head down. All work no play. He was shown respect and was never messed with. He was lucky to get the job he had with that record. Knew it. And was set on keeping it. Played D&D with a guy on deployment for a few months while I was in the Navy. We hung out in the same group of people. I stopped playing because he kept trying to outpay all the female NPC's player characters. When we got back from deployment, the FBI and SIS were pierside waiting for him. Him and some other guys had raped and killed a woman whose husband was on deployment. Also had some friends who tied up an old man who they suspected of molesting one's younger brother when we were teenagers. They tortured him for hours. Then killed him and tried to burn the body. 2 got life. The other turned evidence and only served a few years. Had another guy I was pretty good friends with get arrested by ATF for trying to blow up the car of our local ADA. He bought fake C4 from an undercover agent. They swarmed him while he was pushing the switch. As I write this, I realize I've been close to some really messed up people. Maybe I'm the one who isn't right. Friend's dad was super creepy. He wouldn't talk to women much and made his wife do all the housework. No one could eat unless he was there and ate first. Turns out he was raping and killing girls in his truck while he was hauling goods for a trucking company. No one can give a good estimate how many girls died, but he kept their bloody underwear as trophies. There was at least 30 pairs. The murderer in question was my next door neighbor when I was a kid. No clue anything was really amiss until they were actually arrested. The family were pretty quiet and kept to themselves. But my dad had spoken to them, the murderer, a few times and they seemed nice enough. It was a pretty major news story, organized crime, so the news around the country covered it. Showing the house next door. Not sure we would have realized as quick otherwise. We actually got calls from family all over the country looking back. We'd noticed police cars at times. Parked at the ends of the street for a few weeks leading up to the arrest. But never really thought much of it. Went to school the next day. Where this person's kids also went. They never came back. Well, some kid I knew in 5th grade tried to murder me. I got away with a trip to the nurse's office for a few cuts. But here's the story. One time in art class we were doing projects with partners. I was paired with a girl who hated my guts because her crush was my boyfriend, and he still is, at the time. Her name was Riley. So I was making an excuse to get away and asked to use the bathroom when she grabbed some sharper scissors, a paper clip, and a marker. So I was in the bathroom when she came in and started trying to f-king stab me. And she managed to hit me in the thigh, the arm, and she was also trying to hit my chest. Which luckily she didn't. But I almost had one of my tiny child titties sliced off. I started puberty early. So those were in the way. And so, yeah. She was only suspended for a week. American schools. A neighbor of mine growing up was, and still is, the nicest guy. But we learned he had shot his dad when he was younger because the dad beat the hell out of his mom repeatedly. My neighbor did his time. Got released and lives a fairly normal life. His family never hated him for it because they knew why he had to do it. I knew a bloke who tortured and killed the pedophile who raped his nephew. I congratulated him. He did 12 years for it. The police said he wouldn't have been convicted of anything if he had just killed him without the torture. Was friends with this one guy I met in HS. Long story short, he murdered another friend of mine's. When his name came up as a suspect at the time, it took me back to when me and him would go on about different murder cases and how he studied the zodiac killer. We used to talk about how we would dispose of a body if we killed someone. I grew up on a lot of true crime because of my mother, so at the time it didn't raise any red flags. I just thought he liked true crime like me. A friend of my mother stabbed his boyfriend to death, who was her even closer friend. He called her after the murder to ask if he could take a shower at our house. Realized something was off in that moment, lol. Before that I actually liked him. My mom told me later, though, that he would make inappropriate comments about my brother and I when we were in high school, which is why she never invited him to the house. So that's probably when she noticed he was a little off.